All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to San Diego. It's certainly a different experience sitting out on the balcony than what I left yesterday in Salt Lake City. So hopefully for many of you, it's a welcome change to what is quickly becoming the cold part of the year for many parts of the country. Whether this is your first time here or your 10th, I welcome you here. I really look forward to the conversations that we're going to be having. I think this venue is looking to be a really great venue for our conversations over the next 2 days. So I'm really excited about how that's going to go. A couple of thanks. First of all, we have some sponsors in the hallway, and I really do encourage you to go talk to them and to thank them for helping to support this conference. That helps us to have it in venues like this, and I think it really makes the conference a lot richer. I really want to also give thanks to all of the people that put a lot into this workshop. Certainly, the WECC team has put a lot of time and effort and emphasis on this, and a lot of them are here today, and so you'll get a chance to talk to them. I know that's part of what people want an opportunity for. So maybe if I could get the WECC staff to raise their hand, everyone give them a round of applause for all the work they've put into this. We're also going to see a lot of industry panelists from companies like your own. And so I'd also like to thank the folks who have come from the industry and partnered with us in putting together these materials and these panels and these presentations. I think that just makes the conference a lot richer. You're going to be able to hear really a conversation that spans from our staff all the way through folks that have experienced these things. And so for those of you that are participating in one of our panels, if you could raise your hand so everyone could see too, give them a round of applause, please. And then I just want to note, there's been a couple of changes, of course, too. So we've got some new folks that have joined WECC that are here. There's a couple of folks that have left and gone to NERC, for example. And so there's been this evolution. But on our monitoring team, we've redesigned that over the year, and so we have 3 monitoring teams, and those are led by Stacia Karen, Sandra Rebnell, and Tom Williams, and they're all here. As many of you know, Phil O'Donnell retired. We're very fortunate to have Curtis Cruz, who's joined us, and so he's here on site. And he's most recently coming from a long tenure at one of our sister regions, Texas RE. And then, of course, we have Jimmy Klein, who's our Director of Enforcement, and I hope you get a chance to talk to him as well this week. And he comes to us from CERC, one of our other sister regions, and he's had experience at SPPRE. So there's this really great confluence of experience across the Euro enterprise. And of course, Holly Peterson, who many of you knew, has moved to NERC as well. So that's a great opportunity for her. But I just wanted to highlight that kind of change over the year, and it's really great. I hope you have a chance to talk to a lot of them. And really briefly, I just want to kind of highlight that the emphasis this week is really going to be about the evolution and continued enhancement of our CMEP activities, how they're supposed to work together and be integrated as kind of one CMEP. The experiences you have are from WECC. It's not focusing on a lot of new things. There's a couple of things that we're building out that have long been part of our rules of procedure. But a heavy emphasis of what you're going to hear in the presentations, I hope you hear focus on partnership. We think some of the strengths that the WECC brings is our independence, our perspective, and our partnership. And within this space, we want to continue to focus into 2024 and beyond heavily on that partnership piece. And so I hope you hear that a lot. I'm going to give a couple quick announcements, though, actually, and then I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. But let me just cover these briefly here. First of all, we already have the planning set for a spring conference. That was something we heard last year, and as we were able to kind of plan into 2024, we were able to put a second conference on. And so we're going to try to have 2 in-person conferences a year. Next year's will be in Salt Lake City, March 26th and 27th. We have a great venue right downtown. It should be the tail end of the ski season. So for those of you that ski or snowboard, you may even be able to get a weekend before or after, 40 minutes away up in the resorts. But we hope to see many of you there, and we'll offer a hybrid option as well. Then I just want to highlight the welcome reception. So where you had breakfast this morning is where we'll have this reception. It'll be tonight. Happy Halloween, everybody, too, by the way. I see we have some people who dressed more for the theme than others, and thank you for that. It looks great looking out there and seeing some of the costumes. But we'll have some networking opportunity this evening, and that'll follow at 4:30 after the first day here. And then if you are using the Whova app, there's a couple of dine arounds that have been posted so people can join different dinners that different people are hosting. So you can take a look at that and see if you don't have plans for tonight, you can join one of those. You can also make your own. You can set up your own dine around. And so really you don't have to use ones that are already there, but take a look and join if you want to network and have a mix of folks to go to dinner with that you may not already know. And then I need to note, of course, the antitrust policy and that all of our meetings are in accordance with this policy. Everyone must comply with it. And then a final note that this meeting is public. And so participants on the phone and in person should expect that folks could include members of the press or other organizations and should not discuss confidential or proprietary information. Now, if there's any question of that, you bring that to our attention, and then we'll involve our WECC legal counsel who's listening remotely. Second part of it is, of course, that we're recording this and you give your consent for that to be included in the recording. We, of course, are presenting information that we believe to be accurate. And if you have any questions, please, like I said, flag it and we'll make sure that we connect with our legal counsel. Just making sure I don't have other announcements. Oh, how to ask questions. So, we've got a great turnout here. I think 340 or so folks were registered, so it's a pretty good turnout. And we also have an online portion, people that have joined remotely via WebEx. We're trying to do questions to focus heavily on the in-person aspect, just because of the flow in the room here. We have 3 microphones up front. You can see them here. When you do have a question, we'll ask that you come up to stand behind one of the microphones, and then the panels and the facilitator for that panel will call on each of you. As a treat this week, you're going to get a couple of different MCs, and so the directors on my team are all splitting that duty. So you'll hear from Deb McIndeffer, Jimmy Klein, and Kim Israelson as your shared MCs throughout this presentation. But they'll be working and calling on folks that come up to the microphones to ask their questions. And then the folks that are listening remotely are on via WebEx, and WebEx has a chat. And if there's a lull in the questions in the room, or we have time, we have somebody in the back who's monitoring those, and we'll be able to ask those questions. But regardless of whether we get your question asked or not, if it comes in via that means, we'll take that up after this week is over and try to provide response to those. Next, let me introduce your guest speaker. I'm really excited to have Scott Tomaszewski here today to talk with you. As you see in the materials, Scott's the Regulatory Affairs Manager for the Northern California Power Agency, or NCPA. And among the duties that he has there is ensuring their compliance with federal and state regulations. He's liaison to the California Energy Services, and he's really heavily involved in ERO enterprise activities, specifically the Compliance and Certification Committee at NERC. And for the last few years, he's been the chair of NERC's Certification and Compliance Committee. But I think more importantly, I've had the pleasure of knowing Scott for several years now, 5, 6, I can't remember precisely how many years, but it's always been a pleasure to work with Scott. And I think one of the things, and should become apparent in his introductory remarks, is that Scott has a perspective that seeks to find ways for the ERO enterprise and its obligations, and the industry and its obligations, to find ways to work in harmony, to find ways to partner in support of the obligations we all have to support reliability and security of the bulk power system. So he's always been great to talk with about partnership and to further that mission. It's not an us versus them or a them versus us. And I've always valued that perspective from him and enjoyed the opportunities that I've had personally and many others have had in working with them. So with that, give Scott a warm welcome. Scott, I will turn it over to you, and look forward to your introductory remarks. They might do.
Thank you so much for having me here. And glad this room is large enough after that introduction. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of here. But I do also note the picture, when they're asking for a picture, the latest one I can come up with was from 2014. So there's a little bit more gray hair, and I'll also apologize for reading glasses are much more needed now. So I'll go back and forth, and then we'll see if the distance glasses actually work so I can actually see all of you. But thanks so much for the invitation. And I mean, when I saw the sort of the contents of the program, that in itself is exciting enough for me, just in terms of what we do as part of the compliance and certification committee. And I'll touch on that for just a minute or two. As chair, it's really a privilege to be here. And what I will say is that a lot of what we do aligns with what we do both at the ERO level and to Steve's point, the notion of collaboration. It cannot happen without collaboration. So if you take anything away from any of my remarks or anything else you hear probably over the course of the next couple of days, is that this is a full contact. We are all in this together. If you look at just the employee base of ERO in the regions, you've got approximately 800 to 900 people that are employed within the regions. And that doesn't take into consideration 1,300 plus registered entities that have 2 to 4 to 5 to more people that are involved. So there are thousands and thousands of people that are responsible for keeping the lights on. And as much as we have qualms and issues that we complain about, we actually do a pretty good job of keeping the lights on. So that's a good thing. The thing that's important with all of this is really this focus on continuous improvement, which is really fundamental to building a strong culture of compliance. And so when you start to think about that, we do what we do because we do it well. And we continue to sort of build on that. And that's also the foundation of internal controls. I remember when Steve and I first started talking among CCC conversations, one of those naive questions is, why is internal controls really important? Because if you're just taking care of business and nothing bad happens, then why worry about it so much? And the answer to that is really that it does gain in quite a bit of importance. And to the extent that you are not taking care of business, when things go wrong, you run into trouble. And so that becomes a problem. So the notion of internal controls is extremely important. And it also has relevance in terms of how we deal with risk, not only individually with your own organizations, but also as it addresses the broader issue of the ER enterprise. And so it's not really changed in terms of importance. What's evolved is the messaging and why it's important, and making sure that people understand that. And that's not to say that people aren't aware of it. They just may not really realize how they're aware of it. And it makes it for a better conversation to understand how they all fit together. So I'll talk about the little bit of the evolution of the auditing process and how risk has become sort of important here, and how it has changed sort of the framework of compliance risk and reliability risk. And then, of course, the importance of internal controls, and then how the value of the compliance monitoring process feeds into that. And just as a quick plug on that particular comment, the technical folks do a really good job of solutioning issues. What sometimes becomes an issue is how it gets perceived when we get into compliance. And so being able to bring that perspective into it without materially impacting the technical work that's done is a real challenge. And then we'll touch on how internal controls sort of addresses my favorite topic of 2023, for some of you that know me, is residual risk and how that fits into acceptable risk, and how those insights help with prioritization. The bottom line is that everything we do really should focus on continuous improvement and reducing risk. It's just there's no other message that would be important on that one. So just a little bit of background. So and I'm part of the state municipal sector. And so I remember this conversation occurring about 10, 12, 13 years ago. And they said, we need to get you more involved in the NERC ERO enterprise. And I thought, okay, that sounds like a great idea. how's that going to work? And so one of the things that we had talked about strategically is that there was little understanding of what the Compliance and Certification Committee did. Because it's easy to understand what the technical committees do. It's relatively easy to understand how the Standards Committee works. But in terms of compliance and certification, it was really unclear how that all fit together. And so that was an introduction that I started to walk down in late 2014, early 2015. And here we are 8.5 years later, heavily involved in sort of the foundational stuff that we do. Our charter basically looks at how NERC adheres to the rules of procedure. And that seems relatively straightforward, but it's not. When you start to look at compliance monitoring side, there's a couple sections in the rules of procedure which it applies to. And for those of you that have ever looked at the thousands of pages that the rules of procedures represents, it's often not as prescriptive as you might think it is. And so sometimes it doesn't provide quite as much context, and you have to kind of figure it out. And then hopefully we're all sort of walking down the same path. So it's compliance monitoring enforcement. We get involved in that. We work closely with NERC staff related to that. We deal with registration certification. Our latest thing we've been dealing with is sort of the IBR evolution there. And then of course, reliability standards development. So we have that. We have a support and advisory rule with the NERC Board of Trustees. We have a standing seat on the enterprise-wide risk committee. So we talk about corporate risk there, and we share our perspectives there. We collaborate with all sorts of things. We also have an interesting collaboration with internal audits, which is a very important component of what we do, although we don't necessarily have the authority to address some of the issues that internal audits looks at. We work with them closely to sort of provide them with some strategic guidance as to what they should look at. And they do look at the effectiveness and compliance issues and a whole bunch of other things. And we serve as observers to audits. It's kind of like being part of a jury duty where you get to talk to the attorneys, but then you don't necessarily have to do as much of the work in terms of trying to figure it all out. But it's a great working relationship that we have. We also have a relationship related to the program alignment, and what that did for the most part had got us heavily involved as members of the Align user group. So we become sort of the industry liaison to issues surrounding things that are and are not working with respect to Align, and that is evolving into a fairly good working relationship. We're actually looking to expand some of those conversations with the Align team. I will say in defense of the Align team, for those of you who may have been frustrated at times, there's a lot of stuff on their tick list of things to do, and they are actually working through a lot of it. And you really see that when you're sort of part of these subgroups, which all of us can't be, but you should be at least have some level of comfort that industry's representation is definitely incorporated into there. Collaboration, I cannot stress this enough. And for those of you that have listened to the CCC meetings, it is a big deal for us to collaborate. We take the approach that the greater good is actually a good thing here, and the relationships that we build in terms of trying to make sure that industry's perspective is heard doesn't necessarily have to be answered. So it's a certain nuance of when you're dealing with regulating agencies and quasi-regulating agencies, it is acceptable for a regulator to not agree with you and move on. It is not acceptable for a regulator to ignore what you have to say. So there's a distinction between that. It's always important to have your voice heard. It's not a guarantee that your voice is going to win the day. And you have to sort of accept those types of things. Otherwise, you really don't make any progress within a regulatory compact. So sometimes regulators do things that you don't want them to do, but ultimately the directives are there and you have to address those. So once you get the directives, you have to figure out what's the best plan in terms of dealing with that. And in the meantime, try to shape the decisions that ultimately come out of the regulating community. It requires trust, and it requires lots of deliberation and collaboration. Lots of fun. So let's talk about the audit itself, just in terms of how it's evolved over over where it has been. You know, the traditional audit is check the box, see what you did wrong. Let's see if you violated something, and then we'll kind of deal with penalties and move on. And that has evolved over time. For some, it has caused confusion within the audit itself, whereas now there's sort of multiple objectives with audits that needs to be understood, or at least people need to have a better awareness of. And so what you'll have in there is you'll have one team that's looking to see what did we do wrong and let's move on. That's sort of past, looking back at the past. And then you've got this notion of reliability risk. And so the risk-based concept has developed to the point where we're trying to mitigate risk and reduce risk going forward. Those are things that are not necessarily gradable offenses in terms of an audit, but they're part of a dialogue and a conversation. So you find yourself in a situation where you're looking at what you've done and you want to just sort of move on. So you've got the finance folks that are saying, okay, let me just get on and I'm done with my audit. And then you've got this, let's have a conversation about what we all can do to mitigate risk. And so when you start to look at the individual audit conversations on reliability risk, you have this discussion that then feeds into broader perspectives on what's the ERO doing? How does it affect the bulk electric system? Are there things that we should be considering going forward in terms of perhaps standard development in the future? How do we look at vulnerabilities? So then when you're talking about that, you know, if you put up your barriers and you say, well, how does that affect me? It's hard to distinguish between the conversation that's about reliability risk and how it individually impacts you. And often what will happen is people will think that they're being judged on a conversation on reliability risk when in fact it's almost like an informational session of let's just talk about some things. Very, very difficult to distinguish between the two. And the parties that are part of that get very, very nervous when it's not absolutely clear. That's changing to some extent. And the more we talk about that, the better that experience will be. And that's also an experience in terms of collaboration, training, understanding not only for the auditors, but the industry and all the players that are part of that. So it really comes down to that. When you look at the broader conversation, what's interesting is you start to bring in things like guidance documents, practice guides, implementation guidance, webinars, NERC alerts, all of these things that help us do our jobs better, but don't necessarily hold us specifically accountable for actions that are tied to that broader conversation on risk. It could lead to issues where you end up having to be held accountable for it, but that becomes part of the deliberative process that we deal with. So it's reliability risk is sort of what you do going forward and how it gets built into the things that we do to protect the system. All around continuous improvement. It's always about continuous improvement. And if any of us think that we are always at that point where there's no area for continuous improvement, then we're probably in the wrong profession, because we can certainly, there's always things that we can do to make things better. Sometimes it's just a question of how much do you want to spend to do that? And then you have a different conversation in terms of balancing the financial impacts as opposed to the additional risk that's associated with that. So now I'm going to sort of turn into the discussion on internal controls and how it sort of fits into the risk conversation and why it becomes important to do that. When we start to look at, we all talk about, well, we go from inherent risk and we apply our controls, then what's left over is the residual risk. My favorite topic again, Lonnie. The interesting element of that is when you start to look at the controls that you apply, and then you look at what level of risk is left over, at the broadest level, and what we've been doing quite a bit with CCC discussions this year is sort of trying to understand the distinction between what's left over as residual risk and what's acceptable risk. And when you look at the concept of acceptable risk, part of it comes down to we know that there are things that we can do to bring down the likelihood of something bad happening. And I tend to use that example of getting on an elevator, and we were just celebrating the 20th anniversary of the 2003 blackout. And you all get into an elevator today, and there's still a more than 0% chance that that elevator is not going to work, and we're going to have a cascading outage at some point today. But the chances of that are so remote that many of us just accept that that's not a problem. We get on that elevator and go up to our hotel rooms and do whatever we need to do. And so you start to look at what level of risk is acceptable. And you start to look at what level of risk is acceptable from the perspective of industry or the players in the ER or enterprise. And so when you look at answering that question as an individual organization, you may say, oh, I'm good enough. This is fine. I don't need to do anything else. When you look at it from a region or a sector, all of a sudden the stakes get a little bit higher and now the perspective is a little bit different. Or if you're NERC looking at it from a multi-region standpoint, or if you're FERC looking at things in terms of a directive, you start to get into this debate about the evolution behind zero tolerance where we were years ago, risk-based standards where we sort of are, and in some instances we are more than we are not, and in some instances we're maybe further behind. And so depending on the issue du jour and depending on sometimes the politics surrounding the issue at hand and the reality of what's happened physically, you will have varying degrees of risk that's acceptable. And what happens in that particular case is you never get to a solution set where everybody agrees. And that's okay. If you look at it from the standpoint of industry is looking to optimize the solution. You get the technical folks in there. That's what the whole business model was created on, was this notion of technical expertise really feeds the best possible solution when we deal with all things related to running the bulk power system. But sometimes that's not enough. And sometimes there's other factors that may result in a suboptimal decision that may not have anything to do with your point on making that decision, but it may have everything to do with the circumstances surrounding what happens. Cold weather standards are a really good example of that. There's many that think that the cold weather standard is applied differently in different regions where it could be problematic, where perhaps the value of what is being required in some areas of the country and in other parts of North America may not be as valuable as others. And that's the reality of sort of the process that we deal with on high profile issues. And in many cases, we have to go down the path of saying there is perhaps a better solution that might come out of it from an engineering standpoint, but that's not in play because there's other reasons why we have to go down certain paths that may or may not be tied directly to just the operational aspects of what we do. So when you look at regulatory directives, regardless of whether you think that they're the best possible solution, I kind of characterize as you go into linear programming mode where you say, given what my constraints are, these are the best solutions I come up with. And understanding that and understanding the lens of the other players within the ER enterprise are really important. Because if you look at a regulating community and you say, well, you don't give them a pathway to be successful, then there's a problem. Because everybody has to have a pathway to success. And that's the spirit of collaboration and how it works. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it certainly has to take into consideration all the things that we look at and why that's all important. So internal controls fits right in the middle of all that, because if you don't have internal controls, you're not going to really address the issue of residual risk, and you're also not going to get to the point where anything is acceptable. So we do make progress. We don't necessarily make progress at the level that each one of us thinks it should be made, but that doesn't mean that we're not moving in the right direction. So it's just it's sort of an interesting nuance on just trying to get along in an environment that's extremely complicated and to sort of add to the complexity. For those that don't play in the NERC sandbox, this may just look mind-numbing. For those of you that do, this is probably one of the best matrices that can explain sort of risk and how it's addressed within the ER enterprise. And if I was walk through that just quickly, the risk identification, if you want to just sort of analogize it to something, that is sort of the risk report that comes out every couple of years, identifies the risk. They've been doing a much better job of trying to connect risk with prioritization so that this framework actually works. Then you start to look at the technical considerations to figure out how to make sense of all of this stuff. So you've got a risk, now what do you do? Well, now you get the forces of the RSTC involved, and now you have technical considerations that are addressing that. And then you try to figure out how you provide that type of guidance to industry, whether the guidance is soft-handed through guidelines and implementation guidance, or whether you go down the pathway of a standard. And again, you have FERC involved in that. So you have the IBR decisions. We now have, coming to us soon are going to be a number of standards related to IBRs. We knew they were coming. Now there's a directive towards that. So we need to be in a position to prepare that. And then measuring success on the flip side of that. That's where the compliance monitoring program becomes really important, and trying to fine tune the program so that it actually could answer the questions that we want to address as it relates to risk. Many of the questions that we're starting to tackle with when we talk amongst ourselves between not only our committee, but the other technical committees, and then when we have our coordination meetings as well. So there's lots of stuff that goes on below the radar to address these issues. Ultimately, what's important through all of this is that it really is focusing on trying to optimize our resources that we all have, because we all have 168 hours in the week. And granted, we're free between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. We're not going to do work during those times. So you start to get down into certain parts of the day and how you can actually make use of the things that we can do, as well as the ERO. And with the regions, when you start to look at what WECC is trying to do here, have those conversations, much of this program brings in many of those conversations that we're having at the broader level. And so whether or not you're actually in the WECC footprint or not, being here is really valuable, and being able to not only tell that story, but to share perspectives. And I will say in closing, just in terms of a final point, when we have our quarterly meetings with the CCC, one of the most interesting portions of those quarterly meetings is sort of a broader discussion on key topics related to compliance monitoring. We have had long conversations on compliance oversight plans. We have had long conversations on self-logging, trying to figure out how to bring value to those things. And many of those questions that you're addressing with the program that's going on over the next day and a half. So it's important to keep talking about those things. And it's also important to keep talking about those things on multiple times, because you will find that the more you converse in those issues, the more insights that you get from people that are just sort of taking care of business. That's about all I have. So I don't know, Steve, where we are in time. Just again, thank you for the opportunity to talk to all of you and open up this conference. It's really a privilege to do that. Thank you.